Into the Woods, Skyfall. I mean, it's never ending. Just amazing work that she's doing.
Yeah, just I mean, these little
And so
things
the
that
way that
pass
we're
you
working on
by.
this is I wrote the story, and the way that I wrote the story is I'm really trying to do what I've talked about. And if you've watched my Spider-Man video, I've talked about what I call apocalyptic storytelling, or something which is the idea of taking the postmodern approach to storytelling and joining it in a way that elevates it. So the way that we can describe postmodern storytelling is something like collage storytelling, where we take different references. I mean, it's something that you find in all works to a certain extent, but in the postmodern world, it seems to be taken to another level, where, for example, you see series like exactly like Into the Woods, for example, like the movie Into the Woods, or Once Upon a Time, where they take all these fairy tales and they smash them together, and they do it in a way that is kind of dark and is there to expose the dark underside of these fairy tales, often there to expose how they're related to sexuality, twisting them somehow. So what I want to do is I want to do something similar, which sounds weird, I guess, but it is the idea of using the kind of cynical insight that we get from fairy tales. So a good example would be understanding that fairy tales do actually treat the question of sexuality to a certain extent, but then showing how the way
Welcome to Oral High.
And you'll for 6 months half-price mobile.
Cool.
If your home is sum insured, you could discover that only some of your home may actually be insured.
Hello, hello. Welcome to Otherworld Connections. Where am I? I'm here on Revolution Radio. There we go. And I'd just like to post in the Revolution Radio chat room on Discord that I am coming at you live on YouTube. Live now on Studio A and YouTube. And yes, you're tuned into Revolution Radio. It's the #1 listener-supported station. I'm just having an audio thing in my ear. It's called a headphone, but it's heavily distorted. And I don't know why. Not much we can do about that. It's just how it is. And so this is the #1 listener-supported radio station in the whole world, internet radio. And you were just listening to the New American Dream hosted by Mr. Chuck Gregory, and you can catch him on Thursdays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio A. Right here on Revolution Radio, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. And please consider supporting our efforts and airtime by donating. By following the links on revolution.radio, you can donate through Patreon. Patreon.com/Revolution Radio. You can donate through snail mail. Snail mail. Yes, checks and money orders are made payable to Revolution Radio. US currency, it is essential that it is used. In that regard, the address is on the website, revolution.radio. You can make a direct payment via the station's credit union's online banking system called Autobooks. It enables a supporter to donate direct. Hello, I'm on video. Direct to the station using their credit card or debit card. Both singular and recurring monthly direct payment options are available. The details can be found on the donations section in the homepage. And this is restricted to United States and Canada residents only. You can give us some of your cryptocurrency. Is it real money to you anyway? The station accepts support via Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, and they are accessible via the station's dedicated donations page on the homepage. DonorBox is an international alternative to PayPal, similar in format but simpler to use and hopefully a little more ethical. I don't know. Available via the station's donations on the homepages or the following direct link, donorbox.org/revolution-radio. Not to be confused with an M-dash. Ever heard of an M-dash? Well, I never heard of an M-dash until ChatGPT came along. And now I'm M-dashing the M out of everything. It was because I wasn't educated properly as a child. Advertising on the homepage. An additional method of fundraising for the station is the capacity to place an advertisement on the station's website for the very reasonable and extremely competitive sum of $25 a month. I'll get it to you for $30. I just wanted to remind you, well, that with my show, you'll be able to find the link to anything on my website, thesecretkindergarten.com. And of course on channels such as, well, I'm coming to you live right now. I don't know why, but I'm doing it on YouTube. I would like to go live on Odyssey, but I need 30 credits. And you get 0.02 credits for watching videos. And I'm guilty of not using... you got to watch 3 videos a week to gain 0.02 credits. And I watch James Corbett when I have time. on Odyssey. But I don't watch 3 videos a week, or listen to 3 videos a week. Max Egan comes on again, blaming the Jews for everything. I listen to him sometimes. That's not every week. Any good Odyssey channels? I'm keen to know. I'm keen to support Odyssey more because YouTube, you boob. We're going to be playing some YouTube videos, funnily enough, on the show today. Wading through back-to-back advertising, on and on and on and on, just to watch a video that may not have been worth it in the first place. We're continuing. Well, I'm continuing, and you are observing, perhaps. Sound check from Eagle Flower. Thank you, Eagle Flower's in the chat saying she hears me. I appreciate that. Yes. So, furthering my exploration on Snow White, I've called this episode Snow White and the 7 Planets. It's a big hang-up, the number 7. The number 7 shows up very often in fairy tales. So does the number 3 and also the number 28. And they're all very, well, popular numbers or commonly used numbers, right? Obviously 7 days of the week. 28 days in a lunar month, right? Yeah, I'm just having a sip of water. Yes, it's a sunny spring day here in New Zealand, on the central plateau of the North Island of New Zealand. The sun is shining, the birds are tweeting. I just wanted to share that because it's nice to have a sunny day. Our town was in the newspaper because of flooding. It's been raining and we've got the mighty Whanganui River blasting through. It meets another river, forgot its name because the Whanganui is so talked about and revered. We're right next to it. It's the first river in the whole world to be considered. How's this for identity politics? It's the first river on planet Earth to be given its own title as an entity. The Whanganui River is a he or a she, or perhaps a z, zim, zur. The Whanganui River is a living being, legally. First river in the world to be done with that. So let's forget about all the farms diverting all their silage and slurry into the river. Let's forget about all the rainwater that gets, and possibly sewage that gets dumped in there. Not to mention everybody that throws their rubbish and paint cans in there. But you know what, it is actually quite beautiful, and on a clear day, if you have a few clear days, the water is clear and it's nice to swim in. And I swim in there anyway, because I'm crazy like that. So yeah, I don't know the point of that story, but just the river has been on my mind. You can actually hear it from here. It's a very low frequency rumble. People come from the city, and it's a little bit disconcerting for them. Also, it puts them to sleep. So they come and visit, and they end up falling asleep on the couch. And yeah, I swear I did not drug them. So, yes, we're going to Snow White. So, I'm on this, well, it's turning out to be probably a lifelong journey of exploring and decoding and unraveling the essential meanings of the fairy tales, the deep down meanings. And now we're sort of, pitting that off against what's really on the surface and seeing what the point is, because we can do all this decoding. I want to be able to frame it in a way that I want to be able to put the information in a way that, what am I trying to say, that an adult will look at that and say, I'm definitely reading this story to my 3-year-old daughter or my 3-year-old son, no matter what anybody thinks. That's the plan. because you can have Jordan Peterson talk 3 hours about Snow White, and then in one sort of off-handed sentence say, well, I don't really know if it's suitable for a kid or not. Well, it's got to be, okay? We gotta make that shoe fit, no pun intended. It's got to. It's a fairy tale, right? Fairy tales are for, if not for children, they're for the whole family. But the universalness of fairy tales must equal the universalness of the family unit. It must. So we have to prove it. But one thing I will say is that we as adults tend to adulterize our perceptions and ideas of what what should be for kids or what should not be. But we need to make that decision in the way we make decisions about our own subconscious mind. And I think not many people are really in a relationship with their subconscious, whether dealing with subconscious programs that aren't helpful or trying to train our subconscious to be more efficient or successful or happy or lucky or less depressed. All these things we have the power to do as people. We just have to work with our subconscious mind, doing all kinds of different things that we can do. And I think that's really the way to view where we should go about what's good and what's not for young children, because they are the subconscious mind living literally the dream, living in a dream. Their conscious mind not fully developed. That's trying to come online by about 7 years old. So we tend to perceive a story and then say, I don't think that's suitable for someone that's 3 years old. There are obviously, obvious exceptions to that, right? Clearly there are obvious exceptions. We want to maintain a modicum of innocence in our young. But things that go on in the world to do with ill treatment and poverty and violence and evil doings, obviously nothing sexual. That's the innocence part that we want to try and protect. But everything else is on the table in a certain aspect. It can be on the table, as in young children are capable enough to learn about the world, inadvertently at least. So through fairy tales, it's not enough to say, oh, Pat Rabbit's in the chat here. Hello, Mr. Pat Rabbit. Big hello there. It's not enough to say like, oh, Snow White, the mother was a bit mean, tried to kill her, wants her lung and liver. I'm not reading that to a kid. It's not enough to say that. That's kind of a... It's low... we can do better than that. We are better than that. We just have to take a bit of time to figure out what's okay and what's not. We can't protect our kids from absolutely everything. Oh, excuse me. And, yes. All right. Let's play a video. Let's see what we got. Continuing with Snow White. So this is, obviously I'm just searching on YouTube, right? So this is the occult meaning for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs by Ralph Ellis and Jason of Archaics. And forgive my ignorance, I do not know these people. Just searching, and Okay, let's just play this. Let's see what pans out in 5 minutes of this video.
Yeah, just these little things that pass you by unless you understand them. To most people, this is just a fairy story. It's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But what is Snow White? Snow White, I think, excuse me, is the Snow White moon, who is followed by the 7 planets across the ecliptic. So the 7 dwarfs are the 7 planets following Snow White moon across the ecliptic. It's a story of the cosmos. And the Wicked Witch is who was outshone by the Snow White moon was the Milky Way. And in the which way around shall I do this? This is the Milky Way. Here it is.
Right.
In the night sky. We don't see it today because unfortunately we've got too many lights around, so we don't get to see it. But if you're out in the desert in Australia, that's exactly what it looks like, you know. So it's quite prominent in the sky.
Right.
And what is that in Egyptian theology? And again, I don't think this has ever been mentioned before I wrote about it. But anyway, it's Newt. So
There it is.
Newt
Newt
is
covers
the
the
Milky
sky.
Way. That's why she arches her body across the heavens. That's why she has arms and legs on either side, because if you look at the Milky Way, it splits into arms and legs either side. So the Milky Way is Newt. And the Geb is the earth underneath.
That's Geb on the bottom, right.
And
So we have this the pharaohs, because remember, right next to the Great Pyramid, they excavated a very ancient ship that looks a lot like this.
Yes, they did. Yeah, the Giza bark. Yeah,
right next to the Great Pyramid was a hidden vault that had the ship.
Yeah, that's the bark. This is the Ark of Ra. So Ra had an ark as well.
I got it.
And he sailed across the cosmic seas. So instead of like Helios was driving his chariot across the skies, or Santa Claus is driving his sleigh across the skies, in Egypt they had a boat. And they sailed across the cosmic seas. So the heavens above were a big ocean. They always regarded it as being an ocean, the seas in the heavens above. And so, yeah, they sailed a boat across these cosmic seas. And that's why when we get Aphrodite, Aphrodite is, of course, Venus, who is Isis, of course, the Egyptian Isis. But Aphrodite has a very strange name, which people don't seem to be able to translate, and I've not seen this translation anywhere else before. But Aphrodite means she was born in the foam of the sea. And so, excuse me. And so they're thinking of Aphrodite as being linked with seashores, which is why you see that very famous painting of Aphrodite in a seashell on the seashore, because she was born in the foam of the sea. But of course, the sea is the cosmos above. It's not our earthly sea. And so what is the foam in the sea above? Well, it's the Milky Way, of course. So Aphrodite, Venus, was born in the Milky Way above. So that's what it's talking about. But if we go back to the story of Snow White, the Wicked Witch gives her a corset and puts it on her and pulls it tighter and tighter, so she gets thinner and thinner and thinner, which is, of course, exactly what the moon does as the moon approaches the sun.
Yes, I see the connection now.
It becomes a crescent moon. And then, of course, the moon meets the sun prince. So the moon dies because it gets tighter and tighter until she dies, and the moon dies as well. The moon becomes the new moon. It's a dead moon. You can't see it. But then the dead moon kisses the sun, and here is an image of the moon kissing the sun, just as Snow White is kissed by the sun prince. And just to finish this tale, of course, they get married. So this is the diamond ring of the eclipse. And remember, the eclipse only happens when the moon is dead, just as Snow White was dead. That's the only way you can get a solar eclipse like that. And of course,
That's
When the
profound.
Yeah, just as she died and she was kissed and she comes back to life, so the moon comes back to life after it is kissed by the sun prince. And so the moon comes back to life and gets bigger and fatter as if she is pregnant again. And that is the story of Snow White. It's a story of the cosmos. The cosmos gets into everything, but we've forgotten our astronomical tales, our mythology from the past.
Okay, well there you go. Yes, I believe that. um, it's it's as clear as it can be. And I do understand. I think we've read a little bit of Steiner talking about the cosmos, the planets, and in relationship to us. I think a lot of fairy tales are. A lot of these fairy tales correspond to things going on in the cosmos like this. Perhaps that is part of why they have stuck around and why they have some kind of spiritual resonance with us, much in the way that, how, there's correspondences between us and the planets, right? The 7 chakras and that sort of thing, which obviously I don't know very much about, right? But just an interesting sort of point on our journey of, discovering the esoteric and occult meanings of Snow White. What's the point? And I don't mean that in like I don't mean to be pessimistic like that. I just mean truly. So okay, Snow White is a plural, like a parallel story of the moon moving to a new moon and the 7 planets, the position of the planets, and so on and so forth. And so what then? I think it. What am I trying to say? It's not a hint, but an example of fairy tales as natural law teachings. Because, one of the natural law principles is the law of vibration, that everything is connected, and another one is the law of correspondence, that what goes on above happens below. There's a macrocosm and a microcosm. And I think on other planes as well, but in the planetary planes, in the cosmos and in the person, there is a correspondence there, and that's how people get their understandings of things to do with astrology and the chakras. Yes, that's a good point. I actually didn't have time. I thought, really, 7 planets? I think I need to go and count this, because there's obviously not just 7, right, in terms of the whole whole thing is. But Pat Rabbit says the only thing is, when you use the 7 planets meme, the moon is already included in the 7. Yes. Makes Snow White as the moon somewhat extraneous. Yeah, fair point. That's a fair point. And yeah, I think even if there was another planet to make that more legit, it is sort of a so then what of that? I think one thing that could be said is that long ago, observing the stars and the planets was of a higher, was revered more than it is, today by most people, right? And, stories could have been created in order to, to prepare children for the overt or just the plain teachings of what's going on up in the stars and in the planets by giving them an allegory to resonate with, and that can sort of prepare them for having an interest and a passion in the stars and planets. That very much is a possibility. Pat Rabbit, Metal Rabbit, is saying in Hindu astrology, for instance, and very old Western astrology too, that the moon is already included in the 7. Okay. Yeah. Now this guy was speaking astronomically. I know there are differences there. Yeah. Okay, so we keep that in mind. We're going to move on. 2. Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, Dark Secrets, the real story of a fairy tale. I suspect this is going to say, actually, the Queen was actually the mother, not some distant relative. Okay. And also, first comment here, mention is made salacious almost of how in times of yore children under 10 were offered as brides. Yes. That's a little bit of a conscious red flag that comes up when you look at fairy tales. Ages of the ages of the people involved. Okay, let's press play before we get to the ad break at the top of the hour. Let's do that right now.
Disney has been fooling you for decades. He simplified, turned deep ancient stories filled with harsh realities of life into pink plastic with sparkles. We grew up with a happy picture of a kiss of eternal love without thinking about the fact that it happened without mutual consent. We hated the evil queen, not knowing that Snow White's father was no better than her. And much more. If you dig deeper into the real stories about Snow White without censorship, cold-blooded murders, cannibalism, incest, black magic, and other creepy details of the fairy tale, as it was before Disney and even before the Brothers Grimm, unexpectedly emerge from the darkness of centuries. Today, we'll reveal some of the hidden meanings of the fairy tale as well as tell its darker versions. Done? Then let's dive into the dark waters of the past. Disney's version aside, we mostly know the story of Snow White thanks to the Brothers Grimm, who published the tale in 1812. But the plot in which the girl caused the death of her evil stepmother actually has much deeper roots, which grow from the gloomy and sycophantic folklore of medieval Europe. This plot was taken by Grimm as the basis of the story. In general, the brothers liked to rummage through the stories of ancient times in search of ideas, including studying the fairy tales of deceased authors in order to pull a few tidbits of plot from there. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen, and the ideal in the story ends with this traditional phrase, because in fact the king was madly in love with his beautiful wife, and among all women he saw only her. And this love, from the point of view of modern psychology, would be called a toxic love addiction. One winter day, the pregnant queen was sitting by the window and embroidering. Looking at the snow outside the window, she pricked her finger with a needle. Putting her hand outside the window in the black ebony frame, the woman watched as 3 red drops of blood fell on the snow and wished that she would have a baby with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as dark as ebony. Quite a strange desire, don't you think? Also, caused by spilled blood. Maybe that's why the whole subsequent story is really based on blood. Blood ties, blood images, blood magic, and blood revenge.
How does IT feel with
Oh, some ads. Ads.
to security?
When the couple had a daughter who was named Snow White, she was exactly as her mother had wished, but the young queen died during childbirth. Of course, in the time of the Brothers Grimm, women in childbirth had a much higher chance of dying than they do now, so there's nothing surprising in this plot twist. But we're talking about a fairy tale now, aren't we? While pregnant, the queen made a wish, painting in blood on a snow white canvas. So it's quite possible that the universe heard the poor woman's wish and decided to grant it. Of course, in its own perverted way, in a word, be afraid of your desires, because you'll have to pay dearly for them, especially if you're the character of a fairy tale. In the brothers' version, it's not known how the king experienced the loss, but in some other variations, he was inconsolable. For days, he sat in front of the portrait of his dead wife and allowed only a faithful servant in Snow White, who reminded him of her mother, into his rooms. If so, why did he decide to remarry? Everything's very simple. Judging by the plot we have, Snow White's mother passed away without giving birth to a boy, the heir to the throne. Therefore, no matter how much the king fought for his beloved, the status and duties before the kingdom required the monarch to marry again. Not long after, he met Snow White's stepmother, beautiful in appearance but evil and black at heart. The king had more than a wide choice, but he chose that woman, and hardly because he liked her. The new queen was a witch, so it's safe to conclude that she won over her future husband with charms. From the very first day, the queen stepmother disliked Snow White, according to the official version, because of the girl's beauty. The newly made queen stepmother had a very special mirror which she brought with her from distant lands. That mirror could talk and always told the truth. Every morning, the queen stepmother went to the mirror and asked if she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and every morning it invariably confirmed those words. But there's a more prosaic explanation for this hatred. The newly married couple never had their own child, according to the plot. It can be assumed that this is due to the fact that, despite all the charms, the king paid more attention to his daughter and not to his new wife. As we know, the impossibility of continuing the family used to be blamed on the woman, and it's unlikely that the queen was satisfied with this state of affairs. Years passed. Snow White grew up and became more and more beautiful and more like her late mother. The stepmother seemed to notice that the king's attention to her daughter was growing. In their fairy tale, the Brothers Grimm delicately ignored the moment that the father began to look at Snow White not as a daughter, but as a woman, his late wife, with addictive lust and passion. And the caustic jealousy of a neglected woman was added to the stepmother's instinctive hatred of her stepdaughter. And there's no need to be horrified. How could it be? He's her father. What jealousy? This is incest. Believe it or not, in the history of royal marriages, there was more than one such case when the king married his own daughter. The Indian king Shah Jahan, the one who built the famous Taj Mahal, in memory of his late wife, later married his daughter Jahanara, who in adulthood became very similar to her mother Mumtaz. Doesn't it remind you of anything? It's known for certain that even the pharaohs of Egypt often married their own daughters. In fact, Ramesses II married even 4 of his daughters, and Amenhotep III married 2, Sidamon and Iset. So, as bad as it sounds, it was normal for those times. And as for Snow White's age, because, she's still quite a child. In the European royal families of the Middle Ages, it was not surprising at all when little girls became royal brides and wives. In Britain, it was Isabella of Valois who was married in 1396 at the age of 6. Eleanor of Castile married at the age of 10 to Edward I of England in the 13th century. In Germany, in the 16th century, there was Barbara of Brandenburg-Ansbach, who was given in marriage to royalty at the age of 8. But let's return to the fairy tale. One morning, when the girl was about to turn 7 years old, in response to stepmother's next question about her beauty, the mirror answered her that she was beautiful. But young Snow White was 100 times more beautiful than her. Stepmother was mad. She hit the mirror with her fist, but it didn't break. It just burst with gloating laughter. From that moment on, there was no peace for stepmother until she figured out how to get rid of her stepdaughter. She called her faithful hunter, who was ready to do anything for his mistress, and ordered to take the princess further into the forest, kill her there, mutilate her, and bring back her liver and lungs. Sometime closer to the evening, under the pretext of wanting to show the girl some fox cubs, the hunter took Snow White far into the forest. And here's the question. How is a 7-year-old girl not afraid to go to the forest in the evening alone with an unfamiliar adult? Or she already knew what could happen and was not afraid of it because she probably already had some experience. Was she completely naive and stupid? Who knows? Later, according to the tale, the hunter took pity on the child who asked for mercy and let her go. But who would believe such a story, that the cold-blooded killer, the queen's favorite, just got so emotional and let the poor girl go? In fact, when the hunter pinned the girl against a tree and was about to disembowel her, he was overcome with lust. Pretty Snow White naively begged for mercy. Her eyes were frightened, her hair was a mess. Her snow-white skin peeked out from under her torn dress. Why not have some fun before I kill, thought the hunter. No one will know about it anyway. But it's impossible. Snow White was only 7 years old. You should remember that the Middle Ages were a dark time, and the question of the age at which girls could be married off was also very vague. The principles of morality and what is allowed and what is not were completely conditional in those days. So, what happened happened. And perhaps if the hunter in the dark wood hadn't done it, her own father would have eventually done it, as he saw her more and more as his longed-for late wife with each passing day she grew up. Or maybe it has already happened, which we certainly don't know. Having finished the matter, the hunter really took pity on the wretched poor thing and let her go, being sure that anyway, wild animals would quickly hunt and eat her. On the way to the castle, he shot a young boar, cut out its heart and lungs, and took it to the Queen Mother. Do you think she just looked at them and was glad that her stepdaughter was no longer in this world? Yes, of course. But this was not enough for the witch. She ordered the cook to make a roast from them and had a delicious dinner with it. But was it purely a gastronomic act? In many ancient cultures and cults, it was customary to eat some organs of one's enemy in order to take their best features. But stepmother was a witch. So she prepared the dish in advance and, eating parts of Snow White's flesh, thought that she would take away her incredible beauty. For company, she fed that roast to the king and was perversely disgusted watching him eat his own daughter.
Oh, there's some more ads, Oh. Come on, Odyssey. We just want to have everything on Odyssey only.
Hey Chris, I've got a special job that I need.
Oh, this ad's terrible. I feel like playing it to you just to show you how bad it is down here. This is a grown, middle-aged European, well, Indo-European man from New Zealand. Anyway, he's catching a flight and they're treating him like he's 2 years old, or 5 years old. It's terrible. But I don't get the joke because he acts like he needs the help. You know when you, when one catches a flight when they're not accompanied by a parent, I don't know if they're still allowed to do this anymore, then they have a little sort of system where you go and the parent gives you to one of the air hosts or hostesses. Tell me this is a real thing, guys. And so that was a Air New Zealand ad, and it's meant to be funny, but it's not. It's this middle-aged white man who is catching the plane unattended, and he's basically behaving like a 5-year-old. Not even a 5-year-old, even younger. And they're looking after him, and it's like him having the experience that an unaccompanied child would have on Air New Zealand, but he's like a 45-year-old man. And they played that ad while we're watching this. And that ad is 10 times sicker than whatever's going on in this fairy tale. It's just nuts. It's just nuts. Oh, I'm talking about YouTube ads now, but seriously, what the heck?
Watching him eat his own daughter. For company, she fed that roast to the king. It was customary to eat some organs of one's enemy in order to take their best features. But stepmother was a witch. So she prepared the dish in advance and, eating parts of Snow White's flesh, thought that she would take away her incredible beauty. For company, she fed that roast to the king and was perversely disgusted watching him eat his own daughter. But, standing in front of the mirror in the morning, she did not see the expected effect. and realized that these were not the organs of her hated stepdaughter. It's scary to even imagine what she did with the hunter after that, but knowing the traditions of ancient times, an eye for an eye, and knowing exactly what he did, we can assume that there was some castration. Meanwhile, Snow White, shocked and exhausted in a torn dress, first ran, then walked, and finally barely dragged her feet, making her way through the dark, scary forest. Already on the night of final exhaustion, the girl finally found a meadow on which she stood a small stone hut, the door of which was open. Exhausted, cold, and hungry, Snow White pounced on the food and drink that were on the table in the house and only then looked around. The hut had a table with 7 chairs around it, a large fireplace, and 7 small beds that were just about her height. Exhausted by long insomnia and fear, Snow White laid down on one of them and fell fast asleep. That's how she was found by the 7 mining dwarves, into whose hut she broke so unceremoniously. At first, they were terribly angry because Snow White left them without dinner. The dwarves tried to wake up this insolent, filthy girl and finally gave up in vain and went to bed hungry. Knowing the true nature of this tribe, one can only guess what they decided in the morning. What exactly was wrong with those dwarves? Let's reject the bright image of dwarves imposed by Disney. Cute little rosy-cheeked men who gladly helped the girl to save herself from sudden death. According to demonology, dwarves are spirits of the earth, and in the ancient folklore traditions of various peoples, they're by no means kind to people. They are ugly, greedy, treacherous, and cruel. In many beliefs, including Scandinavian ones, dwarves are dark elves. In British, dark fairies. So what kind of joy did they have to hide a person in their house so foolishly? We can assume that the dwarves agreed to give Snow White shelter and care for her as part of their family only under 2 conditions. Either it was the wishes of the dwarves themselves, or Snow White offered some payment option for her stay. But we have what we have. From the fairy tale, we see that Snow White spent her entire life in the dwarf's hut. She cleaned, cooked, and did laundry. That is, in fact, she became a servant for the dwarves. This was the first condition. But sexual slavery was also added to this. Where does this conclusion come from? According to legends, dwarfs, in addition to all their other qualities inherent in dark creatures, are very grounded and, in addition to greed, have other enhanced basic primary instincts: gluttony and lust. These 7 lived together. They plowed hard in the mine, liked to gorge, drink a glass or 2, and were hardly eunuchs. Therefore, nothing animal was strange to them. And again, the age of the female person did not play a role. Besides, she was the same height as them. The youngest of the dwarves probably benefited the most from the appearance of Snow White, who, due to the absence of women, was regularly forced to help her roommates satisfy their sexual desires. Could it be true? It could. Because 7 sexually mature dwarves lived together without women. In the same Middle Ages, public opinion was dominated, fixed by the postulates of the church and the harsh condemnation of sodomy that any man who's not in a relationship with a woman is either completely devoid of masculinity or is actually a homosexual. Even in 2004 in Chicago, when Marshall Field's chain department store took the theme of Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs for its holiday company, it received a certain number of complaints that it promoted a homosexual lifestyle. Nevertheless, the princess stayed to live with the dwarves who, when she told them her sad story, ordered her to be careful and strictly forbade her to let strangers into the house. But judging by everything that happened next, the princess was not very smart. Because as soon as the queen's stepmother realized that the huntsman had not killed her stepdaughter, she rushed to the mirror, which again informed her that Snow White was the most beautiful in the world and that she was alive, and also found shelter with the dwarves. The displeased witch howled in anger. 3 times she tried to kill the stepdaughter. For the first time, disguised as a merchant, she came to the hut and offered Snow White to try on a beautiful woven silk belt. The woman pulled it so hard that Snow White couldn't even take a breath and fell on the floor as if dead. Fortunately, when the dwarves found the stupid girl on the floor, they saw a beautiful and expensive belt. One of the dwarves pulled it from Snow White. Well, what's the point of losing a good thing? And miraculously, at the same moment, she took a deep breath and regained consciousness. The second time, the queen used the poisoned comb, and again the dwarves saved the girl, who did not realize that it's dangerous to take things from strangers. Why did stepmother always do it herself? Were there no other servants who could do her dirty work for the queen? Perhaps after the disappointment with the hunter, she didn't want to risk it again. Moreover, the people hardly loved her very much. She never gave the king offspring, and if one of the mercenaries had spoken about the fact that the beautiful princess, the only heir to the throne, was alive, the queen would have been screwed. So, for the third time, enraged by failure, the queen cut her hand and poured blood into the magic cauldron. After that, she uttered a black spell. Taking a small apple, dipped it into the cauldron. When she got it out of there, it turned into the most delicious apple in the world. Big, blood red, and juicy. This time, the queen's stepmother decided to be more cunning. She cast a spell on the apple so that only half of it was full with the deadly poison. Transforming into a peasant woman, she put the poisoned apple in the basket and went to her stepdaughter. Although Snow White did not let the friendly peasant into the house, she could not resist the incredible red apple, which seemed to glow from the inside, and invited her to bite its ruddy side. And the peasant woman, in order to prove to the princess that everything was fine with the apple, was the first to take bite off a good piece of it. So, without too much fear, the girl leaned over the windowsill and took a bite of a piece of the apple. At the same moment, she fell dead, and the satisfied witch threw herself on a flock of black birds and flew to the castle. And no matter how carefully the dwarves examined Snow White, no matter how they looked in all the places where any magical and deadly object could be hidden, they found nothing. The girl remained dead.
Silverado's new 5-year warranty and 5...
Oh, just an ad coming through again. And another ad. Yeah, they do back-to-back ads now. Yeah, this... I don't know about this video. They're kind of doing the opposite of what I'm trying to achieve. And, well, it's a monster channel, so what was I expecting?
And the queen's stepmother, standing in front of the enchanted mirror, laughed with a predatory, evil laugh, hearing that she was the most beautiful in the whole kingdom. It's interesting that the apple itself was the tool that managed to poison the princess. This fruit appears repeatedly in myths and legends. In some cultures, it's a symbol of life and longevity, but most of the time, on the contrary, it's associated with something sinister, with temptation, accepting which the hero exposes himself and others to terrible danger. Despite the fact that the Bible does not directly mention it, it is traditionally believed that the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden was the apple. Also, together with the consolidation of the influence of Christianity in Europe, this association led to the fact that the apple became a symbol of temptation, sin, and the fall of humanity. It's not surprising that this image smoothly moved into our fairy tale where Snow White, despite the dwarf's prohibition, accepts the apple from the stepmother's hands, just as Eve, despite God's prohibition, obeys the snake and plucks an apple from the tree. While the dwarves were deciding what to do with the poor thing, several days passed, and despite the fact that it was summer outside, her body did not show the slightest signs of decay. The girl was lying in the coffin as if she were alive. Her lips were red. Her cheeks were rosy. The dwarves are thrifty people. It's a pity for them to bury such beauty. Yes, probably everyone had special memories associated with her. There were no men's magazines then, so they came up with an ingenious idea. They made a transparent crystal coffin and put the princess in it. The coffin was transparent from all sides so that you could admire her from all possible angles. Here's the real reason why the coffin's crystal, and not some other. For years, Snow White lay in a coffin and did not change at all, only growing little by little, turning into a young girl. How is that possible? Is the coffin somehow magical? The explanation here can be quite simple. The girl did not die, but fell into a coma. This term comes from the Greek word koma, which means deep sleep, and is found in the collection of Hippocrates. European doctors also studied this condition, trying to solve the problem in the way they used to solve any problems, by bloodletting. Meanwhile, the medieval ignorant people were quite capable of magical interpretation of such an incomprehensible, mysterious long dream, and at some point it turned into a fairy tale, which we're discussing with you today. By the way, both the crystal coffin and the beauty who lays in dead sleep and remains as if alive were borrowed by the Grimm brothers from the tale of the Neapolitan storyteller of the 17th century, Giambattista Basile. So, in general, everything was much more violent, but the brothers decided to delicately leave behind some things that were too strong, such as a man who was attracted to little girls and his sadistic wife. But let's return to the plot. One day, the prince was passing near the dwarf's hut, and he was caught there by a fierce storm. He asked the dwarves for the shelter and saw the beautiful Snow White. This is where the most interesting thing begins. Seeing the dead girl in the coffin, the prince began to persuade the dwarves to give her to him and offer to pay any amount for her and give all the gold in the world, as he seemed to have fallen in love and he couldn't live without her for a day. A young man begged a coffin with a dead girl inside. No comments. But who could have thought to write such a thing in a children's fairy tale? Where did such an idea come from? It's pure perversion. Well, perversion, yes, but not a figment of the imagination. And to confirm that, you and I will once again have to return to the Dark Ages, dear to us. For example, the Judean king Herod, the first who lived before our era, embalmed the body of a girl he passionately desired, who decided that she would rather kill herself than marry him, and kept her body next to him in his bedroom for 7 years. One can only imagine what he did with her there. In the Europe of the 15th century, which is already closer to us, historians state frequent facts of intimacy with the dead among supporters of the English heretical Lollard movement. And in France, around the same time, the trial of Baron Gilles de Rais thundered loudly. He was a sorcerer and pervert who kidnapped children, conducted magical experiments on them, and entered into relationships with their dead bodies. Believe it or not, in some regions of Central Europe until the 19th century, it was considered normal that if the bride died before the wedding day, the husband could still perform the rite of the first wedding night. But let's return to our story. The dwarfs refused at first, but then took pity on the pervert who had a desire for the dead princess, scratched their beards, and gave him a coffin. Then it's even more fun. The prince dragged the coffin to him in the castle and put it on the bed next to him. This is not the case with the Grimm in the fairy tale, but in other more ancient tales, the events developed in this way. But that's not all. Do you remember when we mentioned the issue of age in relationships in the Middle Ages? Let's count. Snow White was taken to the dwarves at the age of 7 and lay dead in a coffin for several more years. According to some accounts, 4 years, according to others, 7 years. That is, she was either 11 or 14 years old at that time. No matter how long it was, she was still a minor, so our prince was inflamed with ardent passion and brought home a dead child. He spent night after night with the dead Snow White and did not want to look at living women. And somehow it was
Oh, this is too good. Oh my goodness. I think some of this they're making up. I'm not trying to defend, like, Snow White, but they're just looking in all the wrong places for all the wrong reasons, these sickos. Book of Monsters on YouTube. Shame on you. We just got 1 minute before the ad break, so I thought I'd press pause because I couldn't contain myself any longer. Yeah, I think, well, first off, if you read like a fantasy tale to a child, they know it's a story, right? They understand that. So I think there's just certain things to understand about kids and their understanding or comprehension about things is kind of misunderstood. And I think when you watch videos like this, it's kind of saying that these kind of stories are so sick that, you know, you shouldn't read them to kids. Look how bad they are. This is what you're reading. This is what you're kind of indoctrinating your kid into, or something like that. And it's not that. It's not. It's absolutely not that. And yeah. You're listening to Otherworld Connections here on Revolution.radio. Thanks for tuning in thus far, and stick around. We'll see you on the other side of the ad break for more inappropriate fairy tale content. Hello, welcome back to Otherworld Connections. My dog Ernie is destroying a cardboard box outside. You might be able to hear that. We have been watching Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs' Dark Secrets. So it turns out the Seven Dwarfs are actually gay because, well, why would seven dwarfs be living together? Disgusting. Disgusting, gay, dwarf, orc, weird creatures. Don't you know? So you should never read this story ever again. But, it's really heating up, this expose. This is too funny. There's 3 minutes left. We're going to finish it off. Come on. Let's do it. Do good, buddy. Do good.
Necessary to get married to give birth to descendants of the throne. One day, his faithful servant finally lost patience. He pulled the princess out of the coffin by her braids, and from the shock, a piece of poisonous apple fell out of her mouth, and Snow White came to life.
Each kitten is unique. Their nutritional needs are too. Defining the right feeding portions from the start
I think it's
will
'cause I'm
help them grow
streaming.
up healthy.
It's because I'm streaming. This is unbelievable. 2 ads. 2 ads every, what, 4 minutes? 3 ads.
No kisses of true love for you. Pure calculation and good old-fashioned violence.
What is going on
And from
here?
the shock, a piece of poisonous apple fell out of her mouth, and Snow White came to life. No kisses of true love for you. Pure calculation and good old-fashioned violence. We don't know whether the prince was happy with a living woman or not, but as a decent man, he should have married after everything that happened between them. Snow White also invited the queen's stepmother to the wedding. And where, you may ask, did the king go? In the fairy tale, his further fate is unknown to us, but we can assume that after another failure of the plan to kill her stepdaughter, the queen killed her husband in order to somehow amuse herself. So, having received the invitation, she put on the jeweled dress and, for the first time in many years, stood in front of the magic mirror. To her dismay, it revealed the stunning truth that the young bride was 1,000 times more beautiful, and the queen decided to go to the wedding to see if it was true. When the woman entered the ceremonial hall and saw the bride, she immediately recognized Snow White and was petrified with fear. Some versions delicately tell us that here she died of shock because her heart could not take it. But would such a wicked and cold-blooded killer die so easily? Other versions of the fairy tale tell us that Snow White, who after severe trials ceased to be a naive flower, even at the stage of sending the invitation, decided to take revenge on her offender. With all the prince's wealth at her disposal, she paid the dwarves to help repay the witch. The queen's stepmother was captured and delivered to the 7 dwarves, who bound her in heavy, unbreakable chains. They led her down to the deepest dungeons of their minds, where they forged a pair of steel shoes just for her. White hot, they were put on the witch's feet, and the last thing the evil queen did in her life was a mad dance in the convulsions of death. And the dwarves in Snow White watched that dance, tasting beer and remembering the riotous times spent together in their hut. Such a not at all children's story was the basis of that emasculated fairy tale that we are all used to. Because in fairy tales, real fairy tales, born in the shadowed depths of ancient times, everything was as ambiguous as life itself, save for the magic and mythical creatures. Stay with us as we continue uncovering the dark, hidden meanings behind these famous tales.
These guys just intentionally crowbarred wild sex orgies with orcs and children in this. They just completely crowbarred it in there. Correct me if I'm wrong. Let's look at some of these comments. This is unbelievable. I'm not trying to defend fairy tales. This is crazy, man. This is just, yeah, so people saying it seems here the original version, several here shown. There wasn't several versions shown. It was never meant for children, but adults. Grimm Brothers' Book of Fairy Tales had a tamed version of the original. Disney tamed and changed stories for a more children's version. I thought these were Disney originals, but it seems not, and original has been changed several times over. I found that interesting and wonder how many people actually know its true beginnings. So this is kind of, I think people have a desire to get to the bottom of fairy tales because they are so fantastical and wondrous, and I think they just invite inquisition because they're so old and they just rile something up in us. And then we end up with stuff like this. Hey, I thought I knew what dark would look like, but it seems I didn't. And the Taj Mahal is famous, but what isn't is the husband married his daughter. I'll never look at the Taj Mahal the same way. Oh my gosh. Well, we're talking about cats and dogs in the YouTube chat. Metal Rabbit's got 3 cats. And I'm saying I've got a black lab and a cat who are just spending time together because Julie is vacuuming. And Mimi, the cat, doesn't usually go outside. She sees the falcon from across the river every now and again and realizes it ain't safe for me out here. I'm not risking it. And so she hardly ever comes outside. But now she's... Oh, and it's cold usually. So now it's the sun shining, and Ernie the dog's been out here, so she feels a bit empowered too because, she feels safe around our dog, and she has power over him. And so, she's got a little, she's got a bodyguard in our dog, so it was nice. She was out here. So I think it's going to be like a long, slow road to really getting some sort of rock solid definitions of, the esoteric, some rock solid esoteric definitions of these fairy tales. But I am determined there has to be a way to be able to put it, to encourage it to be brought out into the lives of young children, especially today. I think that is reconnecting us with mythology and with spiritual truths of ourselves and the universe that we are losing or we have lost. And watching videos like this kind of makes me feel like that is true. Do you think I'm being fantastical or far-fetched myself by thinking that? Let me know, and let me know why. So I want to go to the number 7. I think we're lucky we have an expert astrologer who's been listening, Mr. Metal Rabbit. Well, this isn't astrology, but it's numerology. This is about the number 7, seeing as it's what pops up a lot in fairy tales, the number 7. The number 7, according to Dr. Shirley Blackwell Lawrence, who wrote The Secret Science of Numerology, my favorite book on numerology, has this to say about the number 7. Give me time to think about it, which is the quote of the number 7. The 7 is the number of spirituality, mysticism, wisdom, and success. And success is the route that I was going with the Snow White fairy tale. The 7 dwarves representing pursuits to guarantee success. Or say 7 acts or actions. Or perhaps hobbies. So, sorry, back to the reading. Pythagoras called 7 the crooked and the straight. God made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. The 7 turns its back on the upcoming numbers. If you look at the 7, that's what it's doing. And it does not start the fervent work of the 8. It looks back in retrospect on all the lessons it has learned in 1 through 6, or to reflect on work well done, just as God looked upon his creation and saw that it was very good. We were told to do likewise. We were told to keep the Sabbath holy. Meaning that it has spiritual and moral worth. By resting, we build up our energy for the work we can do in number 8. The 8 has physical stamina and good health due to proper rest on the 7th. The word Sabbath is 17/8. The self, resting. The self, number 1. Resting, number 7. To renew. Strength, number 8. Those with 7s prominent in their charts need more rest than other people. They can't take loud music, crowds, noise, or commotion. They maintain their balance through serenity. The 7s stand straight, tall, and dignified. They are usually conservative in manner, thinking, and dress. They don't talk much, but when they do, they have something of substance to say. For 7 is an intellectual number. They read a lot and think deeply about things. They seem to be secretive. The 7 is a number of faith. They seek spiritual wisdom unless they are negative. Then faith is replaced with fear, and the strong, quiet person is, instead, an incessant talker. In general, negative 7s will express faith or fear, alertness or laziness. The 7s continually seek perfection, whatever type of work they decide to do. They must be the best. If doctors, they will specialize. If musicians, they will compose and perform. The 7s will dig for facts and analyze everything. They work best alone. Also, the 7s prefer quality to quantity. They want to share their life with someone they admire, or they would rather be alone. They are very private people and can be hard to know. Only when they know and like you will they open up and be friendly. They need understanding, love, and compassion. They may seem cold, but they like to do things for people. The 7s are very intuitive. They are the ones most apt to remember their dreams and dream in colour. Well, there we go. Yeah, that's 7, according to The Secret Science of Numerology by Shirley Blackwell Lawrence. Metal Rabbit is saying they're all inside cats, his 3. Another in the kitchen. 2 outside cats and 2 rabbits on the porch too. Pet rabbits. Is that where the rabbit comes from in your name? Pragmatic. Pythagorean numerology is frighteningly complex. Yeah, I find numerology, any flavour of numerology complex, to be honest. So, yeah, that must be very scary. Alright. So, yes, the number 7. So, the number 7, and obviously there are different flavours of 7. So positive aspects of the number 7: analytical, book lover, deep thinker, dignified, educator, faith, good mind, great inner strength, inspired, intuitive, knowledgeable, logical, loves history, antiques, and the arts. More spiritual than religious, musical, nature lover, peaceful, perfectionist, poised, refined, scientific, silent, spiritual, and wise. And the reason I attributed the dwarves to sort of pursuits is because of all those meanings of the number 7. You've got to be interested in things that you can engage in and express yourself with. So in everything we saw in this, everything I just read in the positive aspects of 7, it's the arts, there's history, the antiquity, spirituality, not religion, music, nature, being a perfectionist and educated and an educator, refined and scientific and quiet and wise. They all sound like people that pursue knowledge in certain things that they're interested in and do stuff with them, to me. And that's kind of what I think in my my sort of throwaway depiction of Snow White and the 7 dwarves. That's what I put the dwarves as. Yes. So yeah, I'm really fuzzing out here on my microphone. But now I want to do some more reading. So this is The Witch Must Die. In this book, I've lost the table of contents. That's what we want. Here's the cover. The Witch Must Die, The Hidden Meaning of Fairy Tales by Sheldon Cashdan. Alright. How much time we got? Okay. So I'm going to go to what I believe will be the Snow White page. Snow White chapter. Vanity. Mirror, mirror on the wall. Here we go. Let's just do a little bit of reading. Oh, here we go. Metal Rabbit was born in the year of the rabbit, 1951. The year of the metal rabbit, in fact. Oh, good on you. The year of the rabbit. Oh, it was the year of the dog, I believe. Alright. Vanity. Mirror, mirror on the wall. This is The Witch Must Die, The Hidden Meaning of Fairy Tales. Oh heavens, where am I? Cried Snow White. The king's son answered, full of joy. You are with me. He went on to tell the princess all that had happened and said, I love you more than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's palace and you shall be my bride. And Snow White went with the prince, and their wedding was held with pomp and great splendour. This joyful scene might never have taken place had not one of the prince's servants stumbled over a tree stump and dropped his end of the glass coffin. If he hadn't been so clumsy, the poisonous piece of apple lodged in Snow White's throat might never have fallen out, and the princess would be on display somewhere in the king's palace. Fortunately for all concerned, he did lose his footing, and the prince and princess were able to live happily ever after. Snow White, with its dramatic portrayal of resurrection and love reborn, ranks as one of the most memorable fairy tales of all time. Not only is the story the centerpiece of the Grimm collection, it also marks the beginning of Walt Disney's career as an animator of feature-length cartoons. Though Disney had produced a number of shorter cartoons earlier in his career, some also based on fairy tales, his transformation of the familiar Grimm story into a full-length feature film was a groundbreaking achievement. More than any other film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs heralded an era of fairy tale animation that changed the public's view of fairy tales forever. Snow White includes all the ingredients that make up the fairy tale cycle: a threshold crossing, an encounter with a witch, the evil stepmother, the defeat of the witch, and a happy ending. Since the Disney version is loosely based on the Grimm brothers' story, the film more or less conforms to the original storyline. In both Disney and Grimm, a child is pursued by an evil stepmother. In both, her life is spared by a kindly huntsman. And in both, she is given refuge by a group of benevolent dwarfs. There, nevertheless, are some telling differences between the two versions, one of which occurs at the very start, whereas the Disney version begins with Snow White's mother already dead. The Grimm version begins with her very much alive. Once upon a time in the middle of the winter, when snowflakes were falling like feathers from the sky, a queen sat at her window sewing, and the frame of the window was made of ebony. While she was sewing and gazing out the window, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. When she saw how pretty the rod looked upon the snow, she thought to herself, "Would that I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the ebony window frame." Soon thereafter, the queen gave birth to a daughter, whose skin was white as snow, lips red as blood, and whose hair was as black as ebony. She named the child Snow White, and when the child was born, the queen died. This poetic opening sets the tenor of the story by reflecting the deep emotional tie that binds the queen to Snow White. The 3 drops of blood that fall from the queen's finger underscore the biological blood bond between the two, graphically portraying... Just one moment, everybody. Leave it. Come here. Come here. Come here. Drop it. Leave it. Oh. Alright, just being blackmailed by a black lab. Leave it! He took their rubbish bin lid. The white bin. Alright. The 3 drops of blood that fall from the queen's finger underscore the biological blood bond between the two, graphically portraying the immutable connection between mother and child. They remind the reader that a mother's lifeblood continues to flow in her offspring, even if she is no longer able to physically care for her child. Oh. A hand from beyond the grave. The death of the mother is a common occurrence in fairy tales. Snow White, Donkey Skin, and Cinderella all begin with the mother's demise. Other children's stories, Bambi, for example, also feature this traumatic and transforming event. But its occurrence in fairy tales is especially poignant. The dying mother usually attempts to protect the child after she is gone. In some fairy tales, a blessing or benediction is used to cement the spiritual connection between the two. Moments before Cinderella's mother dies, she says to her daughter, "Dear child, be pious and good, and God will take care of you. I will look down upon you from heaven and will be with you." Sometimes the connection between mother and child is sealed by a talisman or some other magical object. In Vasilisa the Beautiful, a Russian fairy tale, the heroine's mother gives her a doll and tells her, "I am dying, and together with my maternal blessing, I leave you this doll. Always keep it with you and do not show it to anyone. If you get into trouble, give the doll food and ask its advice." Though the death of a parent obviously is a traumatic occurrence, even in make-believe, the mother's promise to reach beyond the grave assures children that there always will be a force to guide and care for them, even if they are all alone in the world. Metal Rabbit saying that is very similar to an ancient British fairy tale, The Bards. Ceridwen's Cauldron. Okay. I'm just going to... Ceridwen's Cauldron. Thank you for that, Mr. Metal Rabbit. Welsh mythology, perhaps. Welsh. Okay, well, we got that there. I'll be able to do some more research on that. Thank you very much. Okay, where was I? So I'm just going to check that I spelled that right. Yeah, Ceridwen. Oh yeah, Ceridwen. Yeah, sure. It's a hard C. All right. Yes, so in Vasilisa the Beautiful, the mother gave a doll. And though the death of a parent obviously is a traumatic occurrence, even in make-believe, the mother's promise to reach beyond the grave assures children that there always will be a force to guide and care for them, even if they are alone in the world. In some fairy tales, the mother is already dead by the time the story begins, or is simply missing. And I'm just stepping out of the reading here, saying that like, this is one of the reasons people don't find fairy tales to be appropriate, because it's got death and dying in it. Well, we've talked about death play in young children, and at the end of the day, they're closer to the grave than us in terms of looking backwards. And they understand death. And if you leave them to play in social groups and use their imagination and free play, death play is something that is part of that. It's just part of their it's just in their toolkit for making sense of things. So ain't a big deal for kids. Yes, so the miller's wife in Rumpelstiltskin, for example, was nowhere about. And the story begins, there once was a miller who was poor, but who had one beautiful daughter. No clue exists as to the mother's whereabouts or what might have happened to her. Even the fate of Dorothy's mother is a mystery. Aunt Em and Uncle Henry seem to be Dorothy's only living relatives. One explanation for the mother's absence in fairy tales is rooted in historical reality. Before the 19th century, childbirth was one of the major causes of death, and repeated pregnancies constantly place a woman's life in jeopardy. Common infections and disease also took their toll. It thus was not unusual for children to find themselves motherless before they were able to fend for themselves. The replacement of the birth mother by a stepmother, a common occurrence in fairy tales, also has a basis in historical fact. The demands of agricultural life forced men to replace their deceased wives quickly with women who would care for the children and tend to the hearth. Love and extended romantic involvements lost out to practical considerations. Fairy tales are historical documents of a sort and provide a rough picture of what life was like during periods in history when every day was a struggle for survival. Psychologically, the death or absence of the mother in fairy tales has its roots, paradoxically, in the child's need to protect positive elements in the self. The mother in the story, the symbolic representative of all that is good in the world, might be injured, even annihilated, if forced into a face-to-face confrontation with a powerful and dangerous witch. If conflict arose between the two, if the mother, for example, directly challenged the witch's authority, she would find herself in mortal danger. And I think this is really starting to tap into the thing about, at least in this fairy tale, that's important, or that's the key to tying everything up to, what the story really means, and what the point of it is, and what we can get from it, and that sort of thing. It's something kind of Jungian or archetypal, I think. One way to protect or insulate the mother from potentially lethal onslaughts is to simply leave her out of the story. Another is to make sure she dies a natural death early on. Accordingly, many fairy tales, Snow White being just one of them, start off with the mother either dying or simply missing. Though her absence makes the child highly vulnerable, her peaceful departure is preferable to a scenario in which she dies a violent death. Okay, I thought that was going somewhere different, to be honest. The mother's exit, paradoxically, is empowering in that it forces the children in the story to confront a cruel and dangerous world on their own. And I think this, again, is a little bit of a part of it. I think there are things in the story that the angle I'm taking with this, when I get it really down, like locked it down, is that it gives something to children in their soul. It feeds their soul with something that empowers them or equips them to be able to deal with the issues that are found in the fairy tale that you're reading. And in this fairy tale, the Snow White, it's the devouring mother, that dynamic. And I think reading this story to, say, a 3-year-old girl feeds that part of her soul that gives her that chutzpah to, when she's older, if she does encounter this dynamic, to do something about it. To still be able to go and live a successful life and to overcome this archetypal dynamic that plays out in families and communities and globally. Okay, back to the book. Lacking a mother or protector, the hero or heroine must draw on inner resources that might not have been tested were the mother still around. It is the mother's death that sets the stage for the later confrontation with the witch. Snow White contains other potent themes in addition to loss of the mother. There is compassion The huntsman's last-minute reprieve. Security. The dwarves' offer of sanctuary in their debauched home of gay dwarf sex orgies. I just added that in there. And ultimate redemption, the death of the witch. But the dynamic that drives the story and guides it to its inexorable conclusion is vanity. Vanity is the thread that weaves itself throughout, making its presence felt soon after the king selects a new wife. After a year had gone by, the king took another wife, beautiful woman, but proud and overbearing, and she could not be surpassed in beauty by anyone. She had a magic looking glass, and she used to stand before it, and look in it, and say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And the looking glass would answer, "You are the fairest of them all." And she was contented, for she knew the looking glass told the truth. Now Snow White was growing prettier and prettier, and when she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as the day, far more so than the queen herself. So when the queen went to her mirror and said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" the mirror answered, "Queen, you are full fair, it is true, but Snow White is fairer than you." This gave the queen a great shock, and she became yellow and green with envy, and from that hour her heart turned against Snow White, and she hated her. Alright, let's see this vanity theory. Let's have a look. Hell hath no fury. Vanity as a fairy tale dynamic is almost as old as fairy tales themselves. It makes an early appearance in Cupid and Psyche, a tale told by Orpheus or Peleus in the 2nd century AD, considered by many to be the first fairy tale. Cupid and Psyche tells how Venus, the Greek goddess of beauty, becomes jealous of a mortal princess named Psyche when she learns that the young girl's beauty surpasses her own. Realizing her position as the most beautiful woman in the world is threatened, Venus initiates a campaign to retain her title. The story begins with Venus abandoned by her supplicants, who now scatter roses at the feet of Psyche, a beautiful mortal. Venus is so enraged at this affront that she summons her son Cupid and orders him to destroy the maiden. "I implore you to use your arrows against that impudent girl." Venus tells him, "If you have any respect for your mother, you will give me revenge." Cupid intends to carry out his mother's orders, but becomes smitten by Psyche the moment he lays eyes on her. Instead of obeying his mother's edict, he puts down his bow and declares his love for Psyche. When Venus learns that Cupid has fallen for her rival, she not only becomes furious at her son, but decides to take vengeance against Psyche. Venus's efforts to punish the young girl take the form of familiar fairy tale chores. The first requires Psyche to perform an impossible sorting task. She is led to a storehouse filled with piles of wheat, barley, millet, and lentils, and told to place each grain in a separate bag. "You must finish the task by nightfall," Venus tells her. Psyche is overwhelmed, but manages to complete the task with the aid of an army of industrious ants, which, unbeknownst to her, have been sent by Cupid. Irritated by Psyche's ability to complete the task, Venus next orders her to secure a piece of golden fleece from a flock of angry and dangerous rams grazing on the other side of a raging river. Psyche crosses the treacherous stream safely with the help of a river god, and reaches the pasture where the rams are feeding. She is about to venture into the field, but the river god advises her to wait until the animals have tired themselves out before approaching them. She follows his instructions and retrieves the wool, which she dutifully delivers to Venus. But Venus is not to be denied. She conjures up an even more dangerous task, one that requires Psyche to undertake a perilous journey into the underworld. Her mission is to find Proserpine, the wife of Pluto, and retrieve a golden jar of beauty that Proserpine has in her possession. Psyche is told, they're telling us the whole blooming story here, Psyche is told to deliver the jar to Venus, and under no circumstances may she open it on the journey home. Venus knows full well that Psyche will find it difficult to resist temptation, but it's interesting that this is very much the same story, right? And this is like a bit of Cinderella too. To resist temptation, and she is right. The maiden disobeys orders and foolishly opens the jar, hoping to sample its contents for herself. You would think that someone whose beauty is so great as to challenge the likes of Venus would not need to improve upon her appearance, but that is the way of vanity. One can never be beautiful enough. Psyche removes the lid and is immediately overcome by a cloud of lethal fumes that rise from the jar. Cupid, fortunately, is nearby and observes what has happened. He collects the deadly fumes, returns them to the jar, and wakes Psyche, admonishing her about the dangers of foolish curiosity. Wiser for having survived her close brush with death, Psyche continues on her journey and delivers the jar to Venus. The story concludes with Psyche elevated to goddess status for having fulfilled her mission. She is allowed to ascend to Olympus, where she and Cupid are blissfully united. Venus even forgives her wayward son and confers her blessing on the young couple who live happily ever after. Middle Rabbit says archetypal truths embraced with these stories, hence their similarity. True story. And these archetypal truths I want to unpack and get a real grip on, like starting with Snow White and then trying to figure out what that means for children. And, well, I'm like a bit of a stuck record, but I think that that story does something with the archetypal like energy or the truth. It awakens that or allows it to be remembered later in life. A chance to overcome that shadow aspect of the archetype, or perhaps when that challenge, that type of, dynamic happens in the world, that the child is empowered or perhaps has some kind of remembering to deal with it. So on the outside there is that sort of story of like, the evil mother or the evil witch or the evil stepmother, and to beware that I think maybe the solution to deal with that dynamic, that archetype of the devouring mother, is encoded into the story, and it becomes embedded into the soul of the child. That's what I think, and I hope I can find a way to eloquate that in a way that sounds just not completely made up. I really do believe in this. So, though Cupid and Psyche is not, strictly speaking, a fairy tale, the major players are gods rather than mortals. And yes, I think that transfers over to, mythology. This is really all mythology, right? It contains many of the features commonly found in fairy tales. More important, it dramatizes the complications that ensue when vanity takes precedence over more important considerations. Yeah, it's a little bit like, in a way it's stating the obvious. I think like this sort of exoteric lesson, this lesson on the outside is just almost like a cover story, or perhaps like a gateway into the deeper meaning. Something that you think, more research is required here, kind of thing. Like, lots to ponder over and consider. This becomes evident, speaking of dramatizing Well, drama from the complications that ensue when vanity is more important than other considerations becomes evident with Snow White's stepmother, whose vanity is all-consuming. More than just a harmless preoccupation, it affects everything she says and does, ranging from how she spends her time to contemplating murder. All right, who's for supper? Cannibalism is a frightening concept for most people, especially children. Well, see, that's just a throwaway opinion. It's not a frightening concept, but it's frightening if you take the concept that everything you do with your kid is like, an indoctrination kind of opportunity where you're like the lecturer and you say, now, little Jane or little Timmy, this is what you must know about the world. There's these cannibals and they eat babies, so you should be really, really careful. Yeah, of course it's going to be frightening for a kid because they're going to be like, why the hell are you telling me that? What's that got to do with anything? And if you're saying that to a kid, you're obviously intentionally trying to frighten them, right? And that's the thing that affects the kid. That what your intentions are. That you're the kind of person that would go and do that to a kid. Talk to them about that. To freak them out. And that's telling the child that they are worthy of being treated in such a way. And that is a trauma. But if you're reading a fairy tale that has cannibalism in the fairy tale, well, that's not going to be taken necessarily in the most frightening way that it could be taken for a child. That's going to be taken in the fantasy aspect. What's really going to be taken is that you are that the child sees themselves as the kind of person that is worthy of the mum or the dad or the carer, the caregiver. They're worthy of the time and attention of the adult to read a nice story and to have that loving, bonding time together. And that's an act of love, and that is not a trauma. So it's on the actions in 3D reality. Everything else is a known fantasy. Cannibalism is a frightening concept, yes. Yet the consumption of human flesh occurs fairly regularly in fairy tales. Indeed it does. Cannibalism plays a role not only in Snow White, but in Talia, Sun and Moon, and Perrault's The Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. Both the wife and Basile's tale and the mother-in-law in Perrault's are intent on killing the children to satisfy their cannibalistic urges. Even though the witch in Perrault's tale does not intend to eat the children herself, she clearly is cannibalistically inclined. Another fairy tale in which cannibalism figures prominently is Hop on My Thumb, a story by Perrault in which a flesh-eating ogre schemes to eat the diminutive Hop and his 6 brothers. Well, that's what flesh-eating ogres do. Then, of course, there is Hansel and Gretel, perhaps the best-known tale of a cannibalistic undertaking. The story details the witch's attempt to fatten Hansel so he will make a more savoury meal. Why does cannibalism appear as frequently as it does, and why is it described in such excruciating detail? Well, first off, cannibalism is a thing, right? And whether people believe it or not, that, literally baby eating is a thing, And look at all that adrenochrome stuff, Is that all completely made up? I think this cannibalism to children thing has been around since day dot, much like fairy tales. And it's something we haven't fixed. And I think it's just another thing that, although it's obviously bad, but it rattles our cage in a particular way that it doesn't go away. And that's why you get books talking about these things. Why can it not be brushed off? Like so many other things are just brushed off. Why is it described in such excruciating detail? I'm not sure if it's that detailed. I think it does have enough details for it to be something that you think like, what? But anyway, the reason is clear in light of a fairy tale's psychological intent. Flesh eating is an altogether reprehensible act that identifies its practitioner as a thoroughly repugnant human being. Yes. If the witch is to perish, as she must, the reader must be convinced that she deserves to die, indeed. Whereas killing another person can be understood, even condoned, if there are mitigating circumstances. Cutting them up into little pieces and consuming them extends beyond the pale. The appetite of Snow White's stepmother for human flesh classifies her as a thoroughly despicable creature who deserves the worst conceivable punishment. And I think that's just like, just in a common sense sort of way, fantastic theme to have read to children. I really do. Fortunately for Snow White, the huntsman feels compassion for her and spares her life. But what is the nature of his compassion for the young princess? Does he spare the girl because she is innocent of wrongdoing? Does he allow her to live because he is repelled by the queen's bloodthirsty habits? Not exactly. He allows Snow White to live because of her beauty, the story explains. And as she was so lovely, the huntsman had pity on her. The queen would destroy Snow White for her looks. The huntsman spares her because of them. Preoccupation with appearances is featured not only in children's fairy tales, but in adult tales of splitting as well. An example of Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. In Wilde's novel Dorian Gray, a young man blessed with unusually good looks, I know the feeling, is disturbed that time will erase his boyish appearance and wreak havoc on his handsome features. Ugh! He voices this concern while sitting for a portrait by his artist friend Basil Hallward. While the wish to retain one's looks and preserve one's youthful appearance is understandable, the desire to stay beautiful forever is unnatural. Dorian's wish flies against the natural order and clearly reflects elements in the self that are less than healthy. Dorian's wish comes true but is accompanied by a subtle but significant change in his personality. Soon after the painting is completed, he callously rejects Sybil Vane, a young actress with whom he is involved, driving her to suicide. He subsequently engages a series of young women and young men in scandalous relationships with as little regard for their feelings as for Sybil's. As Dorian's behaviour deteriorates, so does the split-off part of his self as represented by the portrait. The years pass and Dorian's behaviour becomes more and more decadent, and the portrait poses a threat to Dorian in the same way that vain tendencies pose a threat to children. Yeah, that's going a bit far. The nursery hiding place fails to solve Dorian's dilemma. Tormented by the painting's ability to give him away, he decides to destroy it, climbs the stairs to his childhood sanctuary, examines the portrait one last time, then picks up a knife, slashes the canvas. The servants hear a piercing scream, rush into the room, only to find their master on the floor with a knife in his chest. Yeah, not sure I'm totally with that. But anyway, that's the end of that one. Another 2 hours of Otherworld Connections with your host, Gino. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. Much love. And just have an awesome weekend. And this is Revolution Radio. Shout out to all the listeners. Thank you, Pat Rabbit. And hey, see you all at the next one. Take care. Much love. Bye for now.